They're beyond livid. But some of the arguments, come on. So when the Republicans are in charge and they suspend the property tax break, it's to balance the budget. But all of a sudden, when the Democrats do it, it's a tax increase. But it wasn't a tax increase when we did the exact same thing. I mean, you guys label everything a tax increase. Is it all a tax increase?
All those that were passed in this last couple of years, starting from the tax freeze to these, I will say, whether they were good policies or bad policies, they needed to go to the voters. I think it was a sizable change in tax policy. It's going to bring in more revenue. It's going to change tax policy and bring in more money. And by the Constitution, you have to do one simple thing. You have to ask first. We could argue whether they were good policy or not. I would argue that the legislature should have asked on those. I think many of them they would have gotten this year. I mean, I don't know how you could go up and say, can we end the tax exemption for the producers of coal semen? I think people would say no.
You say that, John, but I mean, Boulder turned down an open space tax. I mean, I think that's what sent shockwaves through the world. When Boulder rejected an open space tax, they go, people don't care. They're like, I don't have anybody helping me out. I'm sorry. I'm not going to help you out. And, you know, I don't know. I don't know what the voters would have said. I think they would have said, no, we're not giving you more money, and you just need to figure it out.
I'm just saying that it could be in 5, 10 years when we finally have a surplus again and it's time to refund it. This maneuver that the Democrats put in will end up biting them in the tuchus because all this money will finally go directly to taxpayers in a surplus.
How would that screw the Democrats over? Explain that to me.
Because with Referendum C, we had all these tax breaks. Back in 1998, I ran the campaign against Referendum B, which was basically the same thing, but we didn't have all these tax exemptions, which means everybody got a really sizable tax refund in their state income taxes. After Referendum C, they would say, you know, after all these taxes, the average person's only going to get about $70 back. Now with all these tax exemptions gone, since they don't pull away the surplus money goes directly to taxpayers, it could be hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars. I think they're going to have a harder time poking a hole in Tabor because of this. I'm pretty excited about that part of it. You don't care.
I was just waiting for the question.
Well, you know, actually, you should also focus. I know you're not necessarily.
And aren't I right and handsome?
Well, yes, on second, but not on first. You have to talk. People always focus on the negative part of the session. There was a lot of bipartisan stuff there. The parafix, some people didn't think it went far enough. I mean, there's a lot of things they do.
Talk about the parafix for a second. This was something that Republican Josh Penry led a coalition on, and it helped limit how much para money goes to public employees when they retire.
Well, it changes the structure. The COLAs aren't automatic anymore, changes the retirement age, does a lot of things. I mean, basically, he looked down the road and said, this fund's going to be insolvent if we don't do something about it. He teamed up with mostly Democrats on that to get it passed. I mean, there's only, I think, 3 people out of the Republicans in the Senate that even voted for it. But he looked down the road and said, what are we going to do? You know, but then you had all these people, we were owed this, we were promised this, we got really lousy, crappy wages, but we said, don't worry, you can have this great retirement. Of course, you know, I took a lot of these calls, me, former Rocky Mountain News reporter, do you know what it's like to have the rug pulled out under you? And I'm like, oh yeah, no. I think I might know a little something about that, you know.
For me, the big fight, or the most fun fight, was 191, the tenure bill. So let's go into that. Can you explain what the tenure bill did and why it was so contentious?
Well, the tenure bill, and caveat here, I did not cover this in depth like some others did, but the tenure bill essentially allows tenured teachers who get bad marks for 2 years in a row to lose their tenure, to lose their lifetime job protection in our K-12 schools.
Doesn't mean get fired. It means that you can be evaluated partly based on how well you teach instead of being locked in saying, we can't fire you at all.
Right. Yes. I mean, that's certainly one way of putting it. I mean, you know, the opponents of the bill said this basically takes and allows you to gut teachers if you've got a cut here and there. You can cut some of your longer-serving, more salary teachers. So that was the essential fight there. Is, I mean, you're going to respect the people who've been there 30 years, or are you going to reevaluate everyone every year? And
the big part of this was actually federally driven from, what was it, Race to the Top, which is an Obama initiative.
Depends on who you talk to about, you know, were you waiting for Race to the Top, or were you not waiting for Race to the Top? But yeah, there was all this funds.
What is Race to the Top?
Federal money for doing great things in education. You know.
Great things in education? Great things. That's what this great thing.
I don't normally cover education, so I was like, when I was covering it, going, and I would talk to these lawmakers and I go, quit talking like you're in education, because you got to use a noun somewhere so the public knows what you're talking about. Right, Senator Johnston? But it was just kind of that Obama speak sometimes. We got to do for kids and all that. I mean, obviously,
in order to get about $180 million worth of federal money, which the state really wants.
We lost the first one. We did badly in the first one, and then the bill was introduced after that. I think kind of the other thing for people is this bill wasn't introduced to April 12th, and then it just was like, I mean, they were debating this up till midnight or 11:19 p.m. on the second to last day.
Explain that, because it seemed as though the Democrats were filibustering, hoping to let the clock go out on this one.
They were hoping, but they knew it wasn't going to happen, too. I mean, you have to understand, this was a huge political thing for the Democrats, because they sat there and said, okay, if the bill dies, the public's going to kill us and say we don't want reform. But if it passes, I mean, we feel like we're screwing our friends, the teachers. Well, and a lot of these, you know what, half the House Education Committee is retired teachers or involved in education in some way, and they looked at this bill as absolutely draconian.
But it doesn't fire teachers. It just says half of their evaluation now can be based on their performance instead of none of it on their performance.
Well, the current system, what is it, unsatisfactory, and there's been like,
there's none.
Right.
I mean, and you're on the salary schedule. Teachers are on a salary schedule. Once they're tenured, they get pay increases by being employed longer and by getting more and more educational degrees going to college. Has not necessarily how they do in the classroom. So now that changes it. I think most Coloradans, and I think a lot of teachers, the good teachers, are excited about this.
Well, one of the things I was shocked about is business doesn't get involved in educational issues that much. But yet you saw the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce jump in on this, say it's absolutely needed, say higher education and our workforce is going to plummet without this. And actually, at a State of the State speech the day after the session, nary a word about the tax exemption bills that began the session, but 2 full ovations for Michael Johnson for sponsoring SB 191.
So,
well, wait, in the State of the State.
Ritter gave a State of the State speech.
But it wasn't introduced to April 12th. Even though they're saying this doesn't have anything to do with race to the top and all that. There were teachers who did come in and testify for it. I think
this was one of the few real defeats for the Colorado Education Association, the 800-pound.
Well, they came out the last day and said that we are basically, it was sort of, I think it was more like, God, we're whipped, so let's just say it isn't great, but we can live with it. But they did.
We've amended it to it's compatible with our thoughts.
Well, it's never going to be compatible, but at least they feel it didn't suck as much as it did at first. And there was like, what, 200 amendments to that bill or something like that? Johnson said he wrote all these different drafts of the bill. And,
so who is the real hero behind it? If you wanted this to pass,
Michael Johnson,
and a new legislator. This guy's
a freshman.
Yeah.
But he's got. I mean, I think this guy is direct dial to the White House. I mean, he told me you should call Arnie Duncan, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll call a cabinet secretary, right? And I'm like, yeah, who would I call? So I get an email. I call, hi, this is Arnie Duncan. I'm like,
really?
Oh yeah. I mean, when I call Ken Salazar, I mean, I know Ken Salazar enough that I call him Kenny. It takes 8 hours, and well, maybe, but he's really busy. I don't care. Have him call me. Kennedy died. I want to comment directly from him. 8 hours later, you get it. But hi, Lynn. It's Arnie Duncan. How's it going?
Nice.
But he's also got education credentials. Look what he did with his school in the Mapleton Mesa.
Who else on the Democratic side decided to take a hit? Were they mostly people who were term limited, who could afford to make a tough call?
No.
That's why it was interesting.
You had people like Christine Scanlon, who was the Democratic sponsor in the House on this.
But she was a very last-minute sponsor. Very last-minute sponsor.
But Scanlon has been Ritter's go-to person on education since she was appointed to her House seat in 2008. She was also the co-sponsor of the Cap for K bill in 2012 that allows the state to completely redo the way it moves children for the schools.
But she's been an education reformer.
Yes,
this is viewed as a reform bill, so I don't think it's that surprising. I mean, she ended up being the sponsor because, of course, they pulled off Merrifield and Nancy Todd, the teachers, as I call them, who were on the bill and said, I can't live with this. This isn't what I thought it was. And I think the teachers also felt a little betrayed because the governor set up that council for effective teaching, and they thought, okay, we're going to,
do the process.
Study it.
And Blue Ribbon Commission.
Wait a minute, there's a bill, and we're going to do something.
Now let's get to the fun stuff.
Okay.